Good morning. I'm Karen Yuso for the Stories Project, and I'm here today on May 16, 2023 with Mark Hackbarth.
And Karen, it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to have the opportunity to chat with you and tell part of my story for the Stories Project.
Mark, we have actually had the opportunity to sit and talk for hours, even before today,
We did.
because we have had so many technical issues before sitting down and being together that I feel like I've known you for years already. So it's just been a pleasure getting to know you.
And I you.
But for the people who have watched or sitting down to watch this for the first time, we almost have to, just for their sake, start at the beginning.
Sure.
So the purpose of this project, the Stories Project, is to get to know somebody who might be a little bit older in life, who has some interesting stories to share, and preserve this in video, not just for their family, but for the public at large who's maybe interested in sharing some Wisconsin stories. And I think maybe even stories of people outside of Wisconsin.
I think so, yes.
So you were tagged by Tom Mitt as one of those interesting people.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand you and Tom share a birthday seasonal, I don't know if it's the exact same birthday or just a general area of birthday, is that right?
General area of birthday, yes. We're November babies, and my wife is in that category as well. So
you're a mid-century modern baby birthday, is that right? 1950s November.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything that you have learned about that time that's of interest that you could share with us?
Well, I think it was probably the time where life really started to speed up. With the introduction of television, and people had been listening to radio for a long time, but I can remember in our family, my grandfather bringing home the first television in the area. And we all sat around this tube that had very little content at that point, but it was so exciting to sit in the evening and watch that glowing tube. So,
black and white.
Black and white.
So little content, meaning it had a channel or two channels.
Yeah, and the amount of programs you had to watch, the choices were very few.
Very interesting. And had you been sitting around a radio before then?
I wasn't much of a radio person. I was very visual as a young person. So yes, the radio was always on, but it wasn't something that really took my attention much.
How old were you when you can recall your first memory?
About 5 years old, 5, 6 years old is when I really start to remember things well. It's still a little fuzzy. It's not a clear memory, but yeah, I can remember meeting my stepfather for the first time and loving my grandfather to death. He was my father for a good portion of my young years.
So let's begin at the beginning, as Gene Wilder would have said.
Mm-hmm.
You were born to a woman who had what we call, let's say, a military romance. She was a single mom.
Yes.
And you lived with her and her parents, or just her dad?
Just her dad.
Okay.
Well, excuse me. Let me back up a step here. My grandmother was still around at that point too, and since my mother had to work to support our small family, my grandmother and my grandfather were key figures in terms of my growing up. So my grandfather very much was my father figure in the very beginning of my life, and my grandmother loved me so dearly that she decided that left-hand people, there was no place in the world for them, so she made me right-handed instead. So.
Where were you born?
Born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at St. Joseph's, the baby hospital here.
Oh, that's right. We discovered that you were born at the same hospital that my 3 babies were born.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I think St. Joe's might even be considered the baby hospital around these parts.
It always used to be.
Yeah. So you're born in Milwaukee, you're living with mom and grandparents,
and
you have this memory of meeting your stepdad, as you said.
Yes.
So your mom has married your stepdad. And
not quite yet at that point. I remember them meeting or him coming over before they were married. So.
At some point she marries him.
Yes.
Are you her only child?
I am her only child at that point. But she did have two more children with my stepdad past my initial meeting with him. So
they get married and have a couple more kids.
they do, yes.
But you're the oldest.
I am the oldest by far, yes. Far ahead of my sister and my brother.
What's that like?
Actually, there was quite a bit of separation. Because I was much older than them and actually a teenager before they really became a part of my life. I was very independent by that point and didn't spend a whole lot of time at home with family.
So you're a teenager in the 60s.
Yes.
Paint that picture for me, because I'm born in 1967, and of course I only have, a rumor of what that was like.
Yeah, yeah. I was a bit of a wild person.
I'm looking at you, I'm not seeing it, I'm having a hard time.
Some people call them hippies. My hair was very long. It was down past my shoulders.
Wow.
And I spent the majority of my time, as I mentioned, outside the home. I was very rarely ever home for dinner. I was out with friends, and we lived on suburbia sandwiches and wine whenever we could get our hands on it. MD 2020 and Boone's Farm and all those things. So.
What high school did you go to?
I actually started out my high school at Milwaukee Lutheran High School. That was just too conservative of a place for me. I wasn't finding a good home there with the kids that I was with, and so I ended up moving to public school, and I went to James Madison High School to finish off my high school.
Does that high school even exist now?
I think it does still. I haven't checked it recently, but last I heard, James Madison High School was still a thing. So,
okay.
When I started high school, I was actually in Rufus King's neighborhood, and even at that period of time, Rufus King was not the best of places to go. Things were pretty rough there. So.
And that high school, I know, does still exist.
It does, and it's changed quite substantially. In fact, it's one of the places to go if you're continuing on and going to college.
That's right. It's I don't know if it's
college
considered
prep.
a charter school, but it has received quite a bit of positive upgrading, as it were.
Yeah.
So from college and hippie Boone Farm days, what's your next step?
Actually, I never made it to college. I decided to go to work right out of high school, and I worked for a remodeling agency, which was my very first job. And Hank, our next door neighbor, was the one who had the remodeling agency, and he decided that he needed some help, and he'd offer me the job. Now, I don't know if my dad might have had something to do with that to get me out of the house and get me busy and productive. But ultimately, I went to work for Hank and did some remodeling as my first job out of high school. So.
What did your stepdad do?
My stepdad was in the post office at that point. He had been with the railroad for a number of years before he went to war in Korea. And then when he came back, he actually went to work for the post office. So he worked for the government. Back then, the railroad was really a governmental job. And so he worked for the government for just about all of his life.
I imagine you were particularly close with your mom, given sort of the start of things between the two of you. And now you're describing a stepdad for me who's got war experience, who's got governmental job experience. How did he handle having a hippie kid?
Not well, actually. The two of us, we really didn't, in my early life, we really didn't see eye to eye much at all. In fact, the memory that I mentioned of meeting him for one of the very first times was that there was something going on, and he was angry about something that I had done. And in those days, it wasn't a common thing to take off your belt and give him a whooping. And that was one of my very first memories of my stepdad was I got the belt one evening. So.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's, For some people, things like that may actually stick with them for their whole life, but I look back at my life, and the entire thing was a blessing, and how my stepdad and I ended up is a whole different world altogether.
How did you end up?
Well, actually, Dad was the very first person that I had the opportunity, family-wise, to work with through the death process. They were living down in Florida. Mom and Dad were living down in Florida. He had emphysema really, really bad. The next door neighbor called, found our phone number in Mom and Dad's stuff, called me up, and she said, I don't think you have any idea how bad your dad is. From the bed to his chair is no more than 50 feet, probably less, and he can't walk that without stopping twice to catch his breath. And then he spends the rest of the day in his chair. So Dilly informed us about what was going on that we couldn't see through telephone calls down there. And so we hopped on a plane, went down to Florida, assessed the situation, moved them out of their place down there in Florida within a week, got them back home in Milwaukee here. We're trying to arrange some housing for them, but Dad passed away before we could actually make that happen. And I spent a number of days, hours on end, sitting and talking to him, and I had no idea what a rough life he had as a young man. He found his father had hung himself in the barn, and he was the first one to find his dad hanging there. And the stories were just heartbreaking.
So you did your own stories project with your dad.
I did. Actually, that's very true. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, he was first in the hospital getting assessed, and palliative care was part of the process for him, and then he did go into hospice following that, but by the time he went into hospice, he was so deeply drugged because of his inability to breathe, so they just kind of make sure that you're comfortable through the morphine and that to make sure that you're not anxious and really upset about the fact that you can't catch your breath. So, yeah.
Emphysema, was he a lifelong smoker?
He was.
So we can
Camel Straits.
have this, oh, right. Gracious. So this is also a public service announcement?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. Straits especially. Yeah.
Wow. All right, let's back up. You said we went down to Florida. Who's the we in this?
My wife and I. She was kind enough to be a part of this interesting foray into life and going down there and assessing the whole thing and making the list of meds and how much they've got and inventorying everything in the house and trying to determine how we were going to get rid of the property down there. But actually in Florida, it turns out you lease the property and you own the trailer home that's on it. So it's an interesting process, moving somebody.
And this wife is Rose?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's your second wife?
She is, yes.
So, and I've left a big gap between going to work
Yes.
and learning about your stepdad and processing his death. So I'm going to take us all the way back to you finished high school and you've gone to work. And are you dating?
I actually dated my first wife while I was still in high school. Her name was Gloria, and we dated for a while right near the end of high school, junior, senior year. And then not too long after high school, we got married and had my first son, Craig Robert Hackbarth. So.
Okay. Craig Robert Hackbarth.
Yes.
It's a very stately name.
Yes, yes. She loved the name Craig, and Robert was her father's name, so we named him Craig Robert. And Craig was a blessing to me more than I could ever imagine, because in the end, Gloria and I got divorced, and my son and I were estranged, and there were some family problems that developed on Gloria's side that they didn't like me very much, and the divorce just sealed that deal tremendously, and they tried to turn Craig against me. So.
And sadly, as a divorce attorney, I hear those stories quite often. So you're not alone in having this story. But I understand Craig ultimately passed away. Is that correct?
Yeah, 34 years old. He had a massive heart attack. Actually, it was almost like it was staged. Like the good Lord needed to bring us back together and give me my son back, and know that even though we didn't have the close relationship that we could have when he was younger, he cared about me deeply. He was living down in Georgia, employed down there, and had a girlfriend, and that girlfriend thing all fell apart. And he was feeling kind of lonely, and he decided to move back home and asked if he could move in with us. We have a duplex, and the space was available for him to move into upstairs. And he went to work for a local landscaping company called oh gosh, what was the name of the landscaping company? Owned by a fellow by the name of Todd Wright. And he worked for Todd for a number of years before he passed away. But we had just come home on January 1st after spending some time celebrating the New Year with some friends. And Craig was at home, and we made some chili for dinner, and he said, "Why don't you guys go and watch TV, and I'll clean up afterwards." He cleaned up the dishes, and he walked upstairs, and I was just sitting down and just dialing in the TV, and there was this big thump from upstairs. And I walked upstairs, and all I could see was the bottom of his boots. He was flat out on the floor. And when I got closer, I could tell that he was in medical, uh, terrible medical situation, and we called 911, had the ambulance come, and while they transported him to the hospital, he never regained consciousness. The blockage that he had in his heart was in the artery on the back of the heart. And so all the tests and videos and MRIs and all that stuff that they do, because of the heart muscle, cannot see that blockage, and he never regained consciousness and was put on life support. And he never wanted that to happen, and it took us a while to work through that whole thing, but ultimately we removed the life support and watched as he slipped away.
It's very hard. And it takes me back to you telling me the story of your dad and him finding his dad. And I feel like that's sort of this strange mirror being passed on.
Never thought about it that way, but
That's very traumatizing. I don't think anybody should have to endure the death of a child or find a parent in those circumstances. How did you move past?
it certainly was hard, but I know that he's still with me. I talk to him every day. I love the fact that we were able to spend a few years together just before he left us, and it was the one comforting factor in all of this. And he was the one who told me about the undermining of our relationship, and he said, it was hard. It was hard for my grandparents to be telling me something about you in a way that I never knew you, but you want to believe your grandparents. So it was a blessing to have him back for a few years.
He's not your only son.
He's not.
You remarried Rose when?
We are 44 years together. And I think it was, if my math is right, 1978,
Okay.
Something like that. But yeah, we're together 44 years, and we produced two other sons, Matthew, Mark, and Luke John.
Matthew, Mark,
Mm-hmm.
and
Luke John.
Luke John. Oh, three other sons.
No, two.
two other sons.
Yes,
Oh,
one was Matthew
is
Mark,
one, and Luke
and then
John
Luke
is
John
the
is the
other.
second.
I got it.
So when we had Matthew, she wanted him to have my middle name. Rose wanted him to have my middle name. And ultimately, when we introduced Matthew Mark to everybody, they said, oh yeah, now you have to have two more and call them Luke and John. So we just ultimately got it out of the way with the next one, although Luke John actually has a second middle name, and it's Charles, because my grandfather's name was John Charles. So
Oh,
we killed two birds with one stone.
yes, you did. Do you have grandchildren?
I have a granddaughter. I wasn't sure that would ever happen. My oldest son married a lady who's a little bit older than he is, and she's had some hip issues over the years, so there'll be no offspring from that marriage. But my youngest son did have our granddaughter, Lotus May, and we're so proud of our 12-year-old granddaughter. She is 12 years old, going on 22. She is very, very mature for her age.
That's good. I usually hear the opposite story for the 12-year-old girls.
she-
I've survived 3 of those.
Yeah, my son has done an absolutely tremendous job of raising her and teaching her about how to be a good person. She is a peach.
Do they live nearby?
They do, thank goodness. They live right about 2 miles away or so. So on a good day, I could even walk over there to visit. So.
On a good day. Okay, we're gonna back you up again.
Uh-huh.
We're doing this like a fern plant where there's
Sure.
a little tendril here, and I'm gonna bring you back, and a little tendril here. So, you get married, you
Mhm.
have Craig,
Mhm.
then you're estranged a little bit.
Right.
At some
For a
point,
few
you get
years.
divorced.
Mhm.
Are you still doing furniture restoration at that point?
I was in the office furniture business at
Office
that
furniture,
point.
sorry.
Yeah,
You're doing
yeah.
office
No,
furniture.
yeah.
How long were you doing that?
I was in the office furniture industry as an employee of one of the largest office furniture firms in town here, for Business Interiors. They have since closed, but ultimately I worked there for almost 20 years.
Wow.
Before I left there and started my own office furniture concern, doing larger customers' office spaces in recycled furniture.
What was that called?
It was called Cube in the beginning, and then Professional Office Environments. Cube was our first name because what you do is you sit in a cubicle. We thought that was pretty cool, but we hired somebody professional to pick a new name for us and design a logo and all that kind of stuff. And Professional Office Environments was the name she created for us, and it was really comfortable for us. So.
And somewhere in there, you met and married Rose.
Yes. Actually, Rose and I were married before Professional Office Environments. She was actually part of the whole company creation. Myself, my friend Jeff, his wife Lynn, and Rose were the 4 people that in the beginning we ran it out of my sunroom in our house, and Jeff and I were not only the salespeople but the chief cook and bottle washer. We were out doing installs and doing all the work and all that kind of stuff. And we grew it to a business that had 3,300 square feet of warehouse space, stocked full of all sorts of office furniture, and I had about 35 people that worked for me. So.
Wow. Was that ultimately sold?
I tried to sell it. In the end, the company was just consuming Rose and I. In fact, the deciding factor for us to make a big change in our lives was that my son, one evening at the dinner table, since we both worked in the business, there were things that we couldn't talk about in the office during the day when all the staff was around. So we'd get home at night and talk about those issues that we had to deal with. And one evening at dinner, my son Matthew said to us, "Don't you want to hear about my day today?" And that was the beginning of the end as far as the company went. We couldn't we really couldn't find anybody that we felt trusting enough of to run the business. So we decided it was best to close the business. We tried to sell it. Everybody wanted to steal it rather than buy it. So we just closed it up, sold all the inventory, and moved on.
And what did you do next?
My wife went to work for MCW Freighter, and she works for them still to this day. But I opened up my own smaller office furniture operation, focusing mostly on small offices and home offices, creating those spaces for individuals. And I did a number, probably more home offices than small offices. So it was still in a profession that I enjoyed, and I was a one-person operation, and I was much happier.
Were you actually helping people put furniture in their place, or you were consulting and helping them identify how they could decorate, or you were locating and finding and shipping?
Yes, all of the above.
Yeah.
I actually did work on designing their offices, and in many cases helped them design some of their systems as part of that office design, and often also set up their computers and got them connected to the internet, and did some support in that area as well. So some minor computer work.
So I understand you also aren't just doing business, you're not just entrepreneurial, you're more than techie and handy, and you clearly have a creative streak in you if you're helping people with, figuring out their system and their decor and how they're setting all that up. I mean, that's a multi-talent you've got. But we've talked about kind of your personality, or my personality is hugging a million people and bringing them into my fold because I'm so highly extroverted, and you are saying to me, no, I'm a one-on-one introvert, and I become close to these few people, but I'm much more comfortable in a quiet setting as opposed to being the life of the party.
Yeah.
So when you're in business, that networking, having the facility to network and get to know people and large groups of people is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that in business?
Well, that was a very interesting conundrum for me, especially when we opened up our first business, Professional Office Environments, was the interesting thing about opening up a business in a industry that you like, in terms of a profession that you like, was I really enjoyed going out and creating people's office spaces, setting up the panels, leveling the file cabinets, putting all the entire office together. I'm a very mechanical guy. And now I've opened up my own company, and rather than going out and installing panels and adjusting chairs and fixing things, I'm in charge of a crew that does that, and I'm responsible for creating the sales of the company, which wasn't what I signed on for. But it's part of growth in life. So ultimately, I ended up networking a lot. And in professional office environments, myself and all of my salespeople, what I asked them to do was actually create their own network of individuals that were in the office furniture, or I should say office move field. So we had a mover, we had a telephone person, a computer person, a wallpaper, a flooring person, a painter. We'd create these networking groups that had specifically all the professions that were involved in an office change or an office move. And that was how I got around not feeling like a salesperson. Was now I was networking, and I was creating relationships with these people. And we were all at different states and relationships with our customers. And we all heard about the potential change in a company at different times. Excuse me. So we were able to exchange leads or referrals on ultimately when companies were doing something, planning a move.
Well, that makes you very valuable because if a customer needs more than just
absolutely
a filing cabinet, you've got your Rolodex of referrals to give them.
Yes.
I think of myself the same way, right? As a divorce attorney, I can help them with that piece, but they need financial people, they need mental health people, they need the home appraiser or the realtor.
Right.
And so we have our Rolodex of referrals.
Right.
But it's easy for me because I like parties and networking events and breakfasts and after hours.
But you see, when I started that whole process of building those networking groups, it was to get away from being very outward with finding customers and instead now working with a trusted group of individuals that I had built relationships with in the course of all of this. And so they'd sit me in front of people where ultimately I was already raised up by them saying this is the person you want to work with. So it was a much more comfortable way to create sales.
So there's a very well-known business networking group called BNI.
Yes.
How did you get familiar with that group? Because I know you're kind of a big wig.
Yes. Well, that's what they call me, but you know what? I'm still washing the dishes there. So ultimately, what happened was in the change from the professional office environments to my smaller business office at home, it was called, I found that I didn't have the time to put that networking group together anymore, but still as a small business, if I was making sales, my revenue was peaking. While my revenue was peaking, now I'm taking care of the customer for the sales that I just created, putting their office together, ordering the furniture, all that kind of stuff. I'm not doing sales, so I had tremendous peaks and valleys. But then I heard through a friend about this organization called BNI. I went to a meeting and joined right there on the spot that day because I knew the power of networking. Now, these weren't like my groups that I created. They weren't power teams of individuals that are in the business or connected to the business that I am, but still, they were people that went out and looked for work for me while I was taking care of my customers. And they resolved those tremendous peaks and valleys. They evened them out.
And you had a good experience in BNI.
I did. I have. After 25 years in BNI, I have had a tremendous experience in BNI. And actually now, I look at the folks that are part of my life, the people that surround me, the chiropractor that's a tremendous friend of mine. They're people that I met through BNI, and probably a full 90% of the people that I hang out with, like Tom, I met through BNI. And so it was a tremendous opportunity to build relationships and get to know people all over the world. I have friends now all over the world that I never would have made if it weren't for BNI. So,
do you have an official title?
I do. They call me the regional executive, which means that the buck stops here. This is where all the problems get solved.
Are you doing anything other than BNI right now?
I am. I actually just started a new business because I'm not comfortable just sitting around and relaxing. And it is simply called Mark Hackbarth. I'm a mentor, a consultant, a coach in terms of helping people either inside of BNI or outside of BNI create more referral business, be structured enough to actually have a referral marketing plan that will help them consciously create referral business, because a lot of people just rely on referral business coming to you just because you're a nice person. There needs to be a plan.
Or in my case, because you're not a nice person.
Or not.
I
Yeah,
can't
absolutely.
tell you how many people walk through the door and say, I'm coming to hire you because I heard you were,
Yeah.
The B word.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get that.
You're tough.
As divorce lawyers, right, because you're tough.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but I like the you're nice better. I like that referral.
Well, you know, it all depends on your profession. I know a guy by the name of Nitschke, who's a lawyer down in Chicago now. He used to be up here in BNI, but he was a bulldog. And when my son had a auto accident issue, I sent him to Tom because that's what you want you want them to be on your side and fight for you hard.
So now here we are. You just celebrated a 70th birthday.
I did.
Or you didn't celebrate it.
Not so much.
I think it's worth celebrating.
Well, it certainly is a milestone, but ultimately, I don't make big deal out of all of that. Actually, the last time I made a big deal out of celebrating a birthday was when I was 30, because that was a really hard one for me. I wasn't 20 years old anymore.
Interesting. I liked 30 also. I felt like it was the first time people would take me seriously, at 30. 40 was the hardest for me.
Yeah, 40 was tough for me as well, but 30 was kind of the interim. I mean, I wasn't 20 anymore. Now I was moving into adulthood, and I wasn't quite sure I wanted to be an adult yet. So
Do you still set goals?
I do every day.
Every day?
Every day.
Do you have long-term goals?
I have long-term goals and short-term goals. Obviously, all of them are very fluid, especially when you're in a regional executive or running an organization position. Things pop up that weren't on the radar, so adjustments are made each and every day. So
You're in Tosa now.
I am. We live in Tosa, just a block and a half from MCW Freighter, because my wife works there still at this point, and she walks to work every day.
Oh, that's very nice.
Yes.
So, is there anything that we haven't covered that you think is of particular interest that for viewers who might tune in, family, things that they might not already know about you, that is, the thing that people would look at you and never guess about you?
I think probably the biggest thing that I like to pass along to people is my life experiences have really given me the education that I felt in some ways I missed by not going to college, but I did live the school of hard knocks. I did live probably one of the most important lessons in your life, and that is how to create and maintain relationships with the people who are important. Some of the biggest faux pas that I see in people is trying to please everybody. I see that all the time in networking. They want to please everybody, and it's just not possible, and it's actually exhausting to try and do that. So
Well, we can't,
you
can
can't.
we? So you're 70, which in my family is still pretty young. My grandparents tended to live into their 90s, so I hope you have a good retirement.
My retirement plan is actually to just continue working, because I just can't see myself sitting still. Although I've had some recent health issues that have kind of slowed me down a little bit, but right now I talk for a living, so I can talk for a living even if I'm in a wheelchair. So
Well, I hope that it doesn't come to
I hope it doesn't come to fruition either, but
So we're reflecting. It's a time of reflection when somebody sits you
is.
down and has you talk about your life.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the first time you've had the occasion to do that, or if there have been other times you talk to your kids or your grandchild. If somebody asks you, what one thing would you tell your younger self, what piece of advice or wisdom would you go back and say, hey, you need to know that? What do you think that might be?
I think what I'd go back and tell myself is you need to relax a little bit more. Probably the biggest regret that I have in my life, and it's not huge, but ultimately I didn't spend enough time with my kids. I was that working dad and very, very focused on creating a good life, money for us, and that would be one change that I'd make, is go back and spend a little more time with the kids. So.
You shared that advice with your kids?
I have with my youngest son. My eldest son, Matthew, is traveling. He and his wife have a RV, and they don't work. They just travel the United States. She came from a little bit of money, so they're just enjoying life, and so we don't have as many conversations as I would like. I haven't had the opportunity to have any of those types of discussions. Of course, they don't have any kids, so it's not as relevant, but there are still other discussions I'd love to have with them. So.
Well, I'm glad that you're enjoying a grandchild.
Oh, absolutely.
Have a long-term marriage.
Yes.
It sounds like have had a very successful work life, marriage.
I have.
And
And
it's been my pleasure to talk to you today.
Oh, thank you very much. You know, you talked a little bit about reflecting, and because of some health issues that I've had in the past, reflection is just a standard part of daily life right now. I journal each and every day. I sit down and assess the day and recall memories and journal every day. So it's part of helping my body be healthy by keeping some of those things out of my head, and putting them into
a little less
writing.
Wild now.
Yes, a lot less wild.
Thank you for joining us here at the Stories Project.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It was very pleasant to sit and talk with you, Karen, and I thank Tom for the opportunity to do this.
Well, thank him as well.
Very good.